Okay. So, by way of introduction, I'm Stephanie May. I'm a cartographer. A little more about me in terms of what type of cartographer I am. I'm a product designer type of cartographer, and I've been attending these meetings for a while now, kind of just looking around, trying to think about what I might do to contribute to the efforts of the Trail Working Group. Not as a land manager, which I know is what a lot of you are, but more so as a product developer and designer and someone with some familiarity in the map space. Um, Janette and I met during the Climate Base Fellowship that we were both doing, strong interest in sustainability and job networking around future careers in climate. And when she introduced herself and her organization, the Muddy Branch Alliance, I saw an opportunity. I had recently had a conversation with Jake Lowe, who you all know so well, who's been involved with this group for a long time. And one of the things that we started brainstorming about, kind of based on common history building map product kinds of things, was how could a product, something like, maybe like, Open Trail Map as it evolves or some other thing, how could we develop a product that would really reflect the values of this group? And who would the stakeholders of that product be, and what would it look like? And one thing that Jake mentioned at first was small land managers, maybe, that can't afford, they don't have the resources to really create their own web presence. They don't have a GIS staff necessarily. They don't have a big web budget. They don't have a bunch of internet accounts. But really, want to have some web presence in order to promote use of their trails. It would be really nice to do some work to benefit those people. When Janette mentioned that her organization needed better maps, I saw an opportunity. It really felt like she fit that profile perfectly. So I suggested we collaborate, largely because I was curious to chase down that idea and develop really a case study, develop for her project, but hopefully also develop a case study that might help inform this type of work more broadly. With that, I'll hand it over to Janette to tell us a little more about herself and about the Muddy Branch Alliance.
Sure. So Stephanie already said enough about me, but yes, what is the Muddy Branch Alliance? The Muddy Branch Alliance is the local watershed group or Friends of Stream group in central Maryland. Our stream flows from Gaithersburg, one of the largest cities in Maryland, to the Potomac River, which is the waterway of our nation's capital. Alongside the stream is a trail, which is publicly accessible and really very nice. The problem is the public doesn't know that they can access this trail. They don't know it's there, or they sort of know it's there, but they don't know how to get to it. Gosh, if only there was a usable map. After having used the existing maps and descriptions to hike the trail myself, I understood the problem. I tried to address the problem by writing a new narrative describing the major access points to the trail, because writing is a thing I know how to do. But then I met Stephanie. I showed her the existing maps of the trail, and I said, "Can you help me make better ones?" And as you just heard, she was very excited to say yes to that. From there, our key objectives were to create better maps of the trail, update narratives about the trail that were floating around the internet, and help other people like you do similar projects. Now, Stephanie is going to explain how we tackled those objectives, and I'll show the outcomes we've achieved so far. All yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeanette. Okay, so the rest of this presentation, I'll just pause and say, is really a status update where we talk kind of about kind of how we've moved forward on these desired outcomes that Jeanette just mentioned, of improving Muddy Branch Trail's internet presence, of fixing the data in OpenStreetMap, and of ideally creating an example that can be replicated by others. We will have time for questions at the end, but I do want to say, please don't, if you interrupt us if there's something, if you want to ask a clarifying question or a simple redirect question, that's fine. That won't throw us off at all. In fact, we welcome the participation, especially because around this last bullet point, we really need a lot more input from all of you. We understand that a small group like this may differ in needs and requirements compared to compared to Mass GIS or like a statewide group or U.S. Forest Service. But we are curious to hear your thoughts both about this project and just in general, kind of what thinking in these terms about where improving the data and improving the various outcomes of trail mapping might end up manifesting or in real changes and what that brings up for you. So we'd love to have that communication at the end, and we'd love for you to ask clarifying questions throughout as you're preparing your responses there. Okay, so in terms of our first goal, improving the internet presence. So as Janette mentioned, when she first approached me with this project, I was excited about it. I did some background research, and the first thing that I noticed, well, the first two things I noticed first, and I should, if Janette, do you mind just dropping the link to the presentation right in the chat so that folks can, if you want to click these links or go through it on your own, you should feel free. It really, like the first thing here is if you can see the Muddy Branch Alliance maps on the website. I've screenshotted just a couple of them here to try and illustrate the point. But the first thing that Janette has alluded to that I'll say as well is they're hard for casual users to understand, but they're not bad maps per se. Like they're very information dense. And I think ultimately that is what makes them very hard for casual users to understand. It's very easy to understand how an organization like the Muddy Branch Alliance got to the point where these are the maps they're displaying on the website. There's, they show an outline of the watershed. They have links to all of these great photographs. So there's a lot of love and care put into these maps, and yet still, I think because they're really, because there's so much attention being paid, sort of myopic attention being paid to a certain desire to use the trail and collect data in a certain way. They're not very attractive to someone who maybe they aren't welcoming. It isn't very easy for you to just come in and be like, oh, okay, here I know about the trail and I want to use it. Which is kind of the one awkward paradox of a lot of information design projects like this often. The second thing that I noticed when doing the research is that there is a discrepancy. If you just do an internet search for Muddy Branch Trail or Muddy Branch Greenway Trail, there is a discrepancy, in terms of internet presence, with how the Muddy Branch Alliance defines the extent of this trail versus how everyone else does. And I think that really who leads the pack there is Montgomery County, which is is the county that the trail is located in. The whole trail is located in Montgomery County, but half is in Gaithersburg, and that's the half that you can see. This is a screenshot from the Muddy Branch website that I have here, the larger map in the center on this slide. You can see the Muddy Branch Trail extends it has an extent inside Gaithersburg, which is not highlighted on the Montgomery County Parks website. They really only highlight the section that's outside of Gaithersburg. And in fact, in their text and details on their website, they describe the trail as really only going from Darnestown Road, which is the boundary with Gaithersburg, to the Potomac River. So this was initially something that I saw. Wikipedia was copying it. This discrepancy, it was just an initial confusion that I saw, I brought immediately to Janette's attention because it felt like, okay, well, this may be an outcome of Muddy Branch Alliance not quite, or I could say one way that we would know we were really successful with this work is if we could if over time we could change this, if more people saw the Muddy Branch Trail as the full extent of it, rather than just how Montgomery county parks had defined it, or just this section of it that was outside of Gaithersburg. That seemed like it was more in line with what Muddy Branch Alliance was trying to promote in terms of just overall awareness of the watershed and its full extent. But you could, so I brought that to Janette's attention, and I bring it to all of your attention as well, because I feel like this is one theme that might come up a lot, where there's the trail itself becomes, the messaging about the trail becomes segmented by the organizations that are supporting it. And so in this case, there's the difference in land managers between these different parts of the trail is causing them to be promoted and viewed as different or separate, when really they're part of a whole. So the action plan that I proposed to Jeanette was, okay, let's see what we can do to update internet sources other than OpenStreetMap preliminarily, just maybe try and get this corrected a little bit. Meanwhile, I'll start investigating, and so Jeanette ran with that, and she'll tell you a little more about her successes and accomplishments and perspective there. Meanwhile, I started thinking about how to create a simpler web map that really helps people plan trips to hike the trail. Has a very specific objective, and you can see a bit of some of my early sketches in QGIS, playing around with the OpenStreetMap data in order to do that here on the right. Over to you, Jeanette.
Right. So as Stephanie just explained, she discovered that Montgomery County Parks was describing half of the trail that was on county park land, and everyone else interpreted that as being a description of the entire trail. And so this misinformation was propagating across the internet. I contacted county parks, and they said they would update the description on their website. That update has not happened yet. But when it does happen, we hope that more accurate information will likewise propagate around the internet, and that it will end up in places like TripAdvisor, Reddit, and AllTrails. But meanwhile, Wikipedia was something that we were able to just directly go and fix ourselves. I updated the entries about the trail and about the Muddy Branch stream itself. So now Wikipedia is a source of correct information, and we hope that that might propagate as well. But meanwhile, let's talk about our second objective for the project.
Right. The second objective was to use OpenStreetMap as a data store for the data, the canonical data about Muddy Branch Stream and the Muddy Branch Trail. So it's amazing to think that an effort such as the one that Jeanette's predecessors embarked on in 2017 to map Muddy Branch Trail could have happened outside of OpenStreetMap, but it did. It seemed to, I think it happened with no awareness of OpenStreetMap. It's extensively documented by very detail-oriented people who went out with handheld devices and gathered a lot of KMLs and did a lot of work here to figure out where the trail went and to make the maps that you see on the website. Meanwhile, so initially, I thought, okay, we'll track down that data, we'll compare it to OpenStreetMap and see, what we can learn from these two. What I found is that the parallel data in OpenStreetMap is just as good in terms of geometry, overall geometries, in terms of overall definition. There was really nothing to import from that effort in 2017. But the tagging of the trail in particular was incomplete and a little inconsistent. What I can say overall about that tagging, what I saw is that it was tagged. The tagging really reflected the perspective of trail users and not trail stewards. So specifically, you had equestrians coming in and creating a relation with all the parts of the trail that they used and tagging the parts of it that were relevant for them. You had mountain bikers coming in, creating their own relations and tagging all of the parts of the trail that were useful for them. And of course, we want to encourage. That's great. Like that's fantastic that people are finding the trail useful and tagging it in that way. But what was missing was some of the perspective that I think comes up in a lot of this group. There was no operator tag. So it really wasn't clear, who was responsible for maintaining the trail. And there was no real cohesion. These relations that were being created by these trail users weren't representative of the whole trail, or the fact that it existed in order to mirror, to traverse a watershed along a stream. Um, and so and there wasn't kind of an overall perspective. There wasn't it wasn't necessarily clear how all of these different trail users would coexist. So our action plan here was the first thing, the first two things I did were one, to go in and name all of the segments of the trail so they were named the same thing. The naming was a little bit different. In some places, some segments were called Muddy Branch Trail and some were called Muddy Branch Greenway Trail. And then the second thing I did was to create a relation that was specifically, in this case, it was a hiking relation. So there were already mountain biking relations and um, equestrian relations, but the overall one, the walking relation wasn't there, and that was clearly the perspective that would unify all the things. So we created that third relation. And included all of the segments in the Muddy Branch Greenway Trail as it's represented on the Muddy Branch by the Muddy Branch Alliance on their website in that new relation. For the rest of these items in our retagging strategy, I consulted the wiki that various members of this group have collaborated on and helped create, and came up with this strategy. And then so a lot of this should look very familiar to those of you in this group. But we went back and forth. We pulled Jake in to just come and poke at our strategy a little bit, make some recommendations there. And then I really largely handed it over to Janette as the person on the ground, to go and make sense of this all across the 11, is it 11 miles, Janette?
I think it's 12 miles. I've heard 12 miles.
Across the 12 miles of trail, and just to kind of get all of that straight. So I'll hand it over to Janette to say a little more about how that went. Oh, no, I won't yet. I'll say one more thing. So in parallel with that, the other part of the action plan here, of course, has been to create a new web map. So maybe the part of the tagging strategy and the way that I've been using OpenStreetMap data that I feel like might be the most controversial is that I'm putting everything that I want to export into this relation. So everything that is important to, as I understand from Janette, to especially hiking trail users, I'm putting in here. So in addition to the trail itself, this relation contains parking, and it contains various access points, and then it contains crossing information, like is there a crosswalk, is it, where are you crossing a road? I'm curious if there are any opinions in the group, whether that strikes you as a good use of a relation and different use of a relation or bad. But that has made it very easy for me then to export the data that I want. And you can, if you're following along on your own slides, you can click on this link and see the live, very, very preliminary rudimentary version of this as a web map. It has the elements of that relation, which just, mostly the parking lots and the trail itself, with a bunch of base layers that need to be tuned a bunch. And I'm happy to talk more about the implementation strategy that I'm employing in order to build this. If folks are interested, there's also a link here to the supporting GitHub repo. But just to say generally, I'm trying to keep it super simple so that even when Janette is gone and the Muddy Branch Alliance can maintain this map as really probably just something they're sticking. They have the rest of their website is built on WordPress, so it's really just going to be a single page, interactive, no AWS accounts, nothing, which is why I chose, GitHub, and I'm also using PM tiles with a relatively small footprint, so that really what we're handing off to the future is just one single, maybe two single logins for the website and for the GitHub, and some instructions for how this can be updated and some super simple workflows. Um, and that's that's something I'm happy to answer more questions about. That work is very much ongoing. I'm very much in the beginning stages of that, but I'm happy to answer questions. Now, though, I'll put the focus back on OpenStreetMap and collecting the data, and let Janette give her commentary on what that process was like.
Yeah, so fixing these tags was a real team effort. First, we needed some mapping expertise. Stephanie knew how to add tags to the map, and she understood what the different tags meant. But what were the correct tags for this trail? That's where local knowledge came in. Stephanie mentioned the operator tag, which reflects who owns and manages the land. Because I live here, I knew which segments of our trail were on county land, city land, or private property. Having hiked the trail, I knew which parts of it were natural surface and which were paved. I knew where the trail crosses roads and streams. Stephanie was mentioning those crossing indicators. I knew where the useful parking lots were, and I could say with confidence that those parking lots are free and open to the public. Stephanie mentioned the equestrian relation that was in there. We had a long conversation about whether this trail should be tagged as designated for horses. You can see here, I was able to go out and take a picture of a sign indicating that horses are allowed on the trail. But I was also able to say from experience that I don't see a lot of horses on the trail. And based on those local observations, we agreed to tag the trail as horse yes, but not horse designated. And then finally, there was an area on the map with a network of trails. And we were not sure that the correct path within that network was labeled as being the Muddy Branch Trail. So I went out and hiked that area again. I compared my hiking trace to the trails on the map, and we verified that, yeah, in that area, the Muddy Branch Trail is not the path that is closest to the stream. A little bit surprising, but true on the ground. And now let's talk about our third objective for the project. Oh, wait, was that the third objective? Oh, because we're talking about the third objective differently. We've got this special different slide for it. And this one is mine. Okay. Yes, this one. All right, so local partners are useful in mapping projects. How can you find one? Well, first, look for the local land conservancy or Friends of Stream group. They may manage trails, or they'll know who does. Also, talk to city and county governments. We talked a lot about the county parks department here. Local governments are responsible for public parks, and parks usually have trails. Local governments will be able to provide you with information about those trails. In general, governments and organizations will want to make their trails discoverable to the public. As I said at the beginning, that's kind of the whole point of something being publicly accessible. When you approach a local partner, explain how a mapping project will help more people find and engage with their trails. However, be prepared to address the problem of trails being loved to death. Some of my neighboring watershed groups have trails that are better known and easier to access, and they say they have a problem of too many people on their trails. Be prepared to help the local partner with this problem, or expect that local partners may just say no, they don't want their trail to be easier to find. Once you have established a partnership, teach the partner how to use OpenStreetMap. Also, it is useful if you are willing to do a lot of the technical work yourself. I generally consider myself a technical person, and I did not find this OpenStreetMap tagging process to be easy or intuitive. I am definitely very grateful that Stephanie dealt with the KML files for me. I still have no idea what those are or what to do with them. At the same time, as I said, you should describe to the local partner what the tags are, and you should rely on them to provide the information for those tags. You absolutely should ask them to go out and look at things on the trail. They will probably enjoy that assignment. They work with trails for a reason. And then we've got one more slide for our questions. We know you have questions. Here we are at the end of the trail. That is where the Muddy Branch Stream empties into the Potomac. What questions do you have about our project?